What happens if you come into sudden wealth or an inheritance? There's a lot more to think about than you might have considered. Tiffany Ritchie is going to tell us all about it today. Tiffany, can you tell us some ways that people can come into a lot of money via inheritance or something else?
Yeah, so there are a few different ways that people kind of suddenly come into money. For us and our clients, the most common way is through inheritances. But of course, there's other examples. Life insurance payouts are another example. There's the classic like lottery winner, sometimes lawsuit settlements, and even just like a really large change in your salary. If you get a big salary bump or start a new job or have like a large bonus.
That makes sense. So why would an experience like this be challenging?
Yeah, it can be really difficult to navigate a sudden influx of money for many different reasons. One is it could, be tempting to use the money in ways that you're not accustomed to using money. It could really change your financial plan or the outlook of your financial plan, or it could even cause like stress within your family or your friends because they might know about your sudden wealth and kind of have different expectations from you. So it's interesting. There's different things to navigate. And of course, tax consequences and tax nuances we need to think about.
So can sudden wealth impact someone's emotional well-being or relationships?
Yeah, yeah. So that's what I was touching on a little bit with the fact that when you come into sudden wealth, it can affect you in a few different ways. One is what I mentioned before, where your friends or family might know about the sudden wealth and it could really affect those relationships, which could affect your emotional well being. And it could be really innocent. It could be, your children know that you inherited from their grandma and kind of have expectations to get a payout, but it might not be the time to make that payout. You as the inheritor might have needed those resources. Or it could even be that you received this money in a way that is not comfortable. We have clients, for instance, that receive money from like a life insurance policy. And when they receive that money, they think, I don't want this money. It feels like
Oh,
tainted or sad. Yeah. They would say, I would do anything. I'd give every dollar back if I could instead have my spouse.
oh.
And yeah, it can really be tricky to navigate some of these instances of suddenly receiving a large sum of money.
So I imagine people are going to start getting requests for money from you, like financial requests. How do you think someone should handle those?
Yeah, we have a couple different techniques we like to use to handle financial requests. One is just using us, the financial advisors, the bad guy.
Sure.
And we say to our clients, you can always just say, I've really got to run this by my financial advisor. They've already put my money to work in my financial plan, and I've got to see if this fits. And that can be enough to just kind of delay the conversation or kind of let it fizzle out. Other Another thing we do is we can provide a form to our clients, either upon request if someone keeps bugging them, or if they really do have an interest in helping certain charities or certain people, they can have this form on the ready. And this form just collects information, who is the request from, what is your tax ID number, and what is the funds going to be used for, how much are you requesting, certain
Hmm.
things that cause the person or the charity to have to pause and fill it out. And more often than not, they'll probably never get it back to you or the person who has received the sudden wealth. And if they do get it back, then they can get that to us, and it can help us actually have an evaluation system and the information we would need to help see how this could fit into their financial plan and if it's a feasible amount. These kind of hurdles to jump over let the person or the charity know this isn't a slam dunk. They have to do the work to fill out the form, which they probably won't do. And then if they do, they know this is going into an evaluation system. We have a process and a procedure for choosing, who receives funds.
Yes.
And it's not the client who is the bad guy here. This is all coming from the financial advisor. This is what their financial advisor has forced them to do. So again, making us kind of the bad guy in the situation.
That makes sense. So, if you receive a large sum of money, what are some of the first steps you should take?
Yeah, so really kind of pausing, talking to your financial advisor if you have one, potentially talking to your tax advisor would also be really wise depending on how you receive funds. There are different tax nuances to consider. And if you don't have a financial advisor, I recommend, looking into one, especially if this is a larger sum of money, something that could really impact your life or impact your outlook.
What should one look for in a financial advisor?
So, the first thing that I would really encourage looking for is working with a CFP professional that's a certified financial planner. All of the financial planners at our office are CFPs, and it's really the gold standard in our profession. CFPs have passed an education requirement, which requires not just an undergraduate degree, but it requires additional financial planning coursework. They have taken a rigorous examination. They've done continuing education. They have experience before they can even call themselves a CFP. And we have to keep up with a code of ethics, including a fiduciary responsibility that really means putting the client first before ourselves or before the firm. So we really have to always act in the client's best interest, as well as other aspects of a code of ethics that we have to stick to.
All right. So, are there specific investment strategies you recommend for new wealth?
Yeah, so investment strategies are interesting. We really need to talk to the client and figure out their goals. First, we like to sit down and think about the short-term goals. Are there any, and let's be honest, when people receive a large sum of money, there probably are some short-term goals. Most people have something in mind that, geez, if I got $1 million today, I would go on a trip or I would replace the car that I've been needing to replace. Most people have something in mind that they might want to buy or pay off debt. And so we talk about those short term goals and we make sure that those can still fit into the financial plan. And if so, we need to set that money aside in a really safe way, perhaps a money market account or a high interest savings account. We need to set that money aside so it is available and ready when it's time to make that purchase. We also need to make sure we're doing the same thing with any tax consequences. So if there are tax liabilities related to the money that the client receives, we need to make sure that that money is set aside and ready to pay the taxes. So for the short-term goals, using really safe investments, and then we see how the rest weaves into the financial plan. What are the midterm goals? What are the long-term goals? Does our client really need this money in order to make their financial plan sing and have the cushion that they need to have a successful financial outlook? If so, then we probably really need to weave that into their existing portfolio so that they can start using those resources to live off of as they prepare for retirement, if that's their plan. We really look at it individually, but from a big overarching picture, this kind of gives some ideas of what we're looking for in terms of how to invest the sum of money that has come in.
So, what role do estate planners and tax advisors play in
Mm-hmm.
managing this?
Yeah, that's a great question. As we've touched on a couple times, there's certainly possibility of tax consequences. Typically, I'm going to be very generalized here. When receiving money from life insurance or from an estate, so an inheritance, there are often very minimal tax consequences. But any of these other forms, if we're talking about a change in income, if we're talking about lottery winnings, if we're talking about a large bonus or large commissions, those will typically have tax consequences that we need to consider. So bringing in a tax team is really important to make sure that we're thinking through what are some of the strategies, and your financial planner and your tax advisor can do this together. I really love working with other professionals in tandem for the benefit of our clients. So we like to work together and hopefully see some good synergies there. So we look at tax strategy looking forward. What are ways that we can take advantage of potentially in the year receiving money? Maybe we want to use some charitable options so that we can really take advantage of a higher charitable deduction in this year that income has flowed to our client. So we work with the tax advisor to figure out how much tax are we expecting and what other strategies we can weave in. We would work with an attorney if we're looking at, okay, are there different estate consequences we need to consider? Has the sum of money that's come to our client been so large that we need to consider how to avoid estate taxes? Do we need to create trusts maybe to come up to weave in with a tax professional? So now it could be three professionals working together for the benefit of our client. Because we might create a charitable trust that helps achieve the tax strategies that we've created, but we need the attorney to draft the trust. And so we can all work together to come up with the strategies that can really help meet our clients' goals.
How can people ensure that this wealth is preserved for future generations?
Yeah, there's a couple different ways to do that. Weaving in what we just talked about with the estate attorney, we can talk to the client and first see if that's an interest. Some of our clients say, we don't want to leave our child a dime. That's typically not quite the case, but that is sometimes a scenario that we're looking at. Maybe the client doesn't have any living children, and so there isn't much of a legacy remainder interest. And so it's okay to draw down the entire portfolio. But most of our clients have a desire to leave something to future generations. So we talk about what that is and how much they'd like to pass on. Because if you really think about it, in inheritance or large sum of money of any sort that comes to you can really change your life, often for the better, could be for the worse. We've all heard those stories about, a lottery winner or a professional football player that loses everything. So it could be for the worse. We try and make sure that's not the case. We think that if you're working with a professional who's helping advise you and guide you, you're much more common to make it for the better. So if you're receiving money that can really make your life substantially better because you're able to, invest in yourself or pay off debts, leverage these funds in a way that gives you a better quality of life, more likely than not, our clients want to be able to do that for the next generation and generations beyond that as well. One tool that we can use to help make sure that wealth is preserved is leveraging some trusts that helps make sure that we don't have to pay estate taxes and minimize taxes in general. We can also look at, how do we want to make sure that our next generation is responsible? And that could be not just children, but grandchildren and great grandchildren have something that kind of stays in place and says, this money is really to be used for these intentions that align with our clients' goals. That might be starting a business, buying a home, traveling, affording the opportunity for someone to have, each couple to have a stay-at-home parent in the family. There's so many different values that our clients have that they can pass on and kind of tie to these resources and help use them in a way that meets the family value and allows it to be longer lasting. So that's working with an attorney to create trusts. Another way we can do it is really help with education. So we can help our clients understand how much can we live off of, like, the income from this money and really allow the corpus to last. And we can do that for the client, we can do that for future generations, and we can set up tools and resources that either kind of force the money to be used that way, or we really use education to help our clients understand, like, hey, this money can go a lot longer if we're living off of the income mostly and allowing the base to stay secure, opposed to just kind of blowing it all.
What about some strategies for philanthropic giving or charitable contributions that align with someone's values?
Yeah, Richie, that's a great ad. That is one of the values that a lot of our clients have, to give charitably. but it's not necessarily the first thing that most people think of when they're receiving a sum of money. Some
Mm.
do, but it is actually one of the best ways that families stay together. I've done a lot of work in education with the Heritage Institute, and I've essentially with them studied how do families have multi-generational wealth and families that stay together. And one of the biggest things that those successful families of multi-generational wealth and families that kind of keep that family unit and stay together and have a relationship, one of the main things that they do is give charitably in a way that involves multiple family members. So in a
Mm.
previous conversation we've had, Richie, we talked about donor advised funds, and um, that is a tool where you can put money into a donor advised fund and get the tax deduction in the year that you donate or put the money into the fund, but you don't have to distribute all that money right away. You can distribute it over years and have that money invested. And so using a donor advised fund or using a charitable trust are ways that you can get a big tax deduction in the year that taxes might be the biggest hit, and then
Yeah.
involve the family members and say, let's work together each year to choose what charities these funds are going to. And again, that allows the opportunity to teach. Say, we're really leaving the corpus in the donor advised fund, and we're going to give the income to the charities. So that you don't have to do it that way, but that's one of the tools we can use to kind of teach that method. We can also use that to say everybody gets a voice, and you don't have to worry about, oh, if we're giving to a charity, then we're not going to get this money because it's already promised to charities. Once you put it in the donor advised fund, that's where it has to go. But you can choose any 501c3, any charitable organization. And so you might have a grandchild that says, my heartstrings are really pulled because I have a foster care friend in school with me, and I really want money to go to a foster care charity. And so that's where the money or part of the money can go that year. And you can get each generation involved and get them interested in philanthropic giving. If that's a value you have, you're passing it down to future generations. And like I said, it's kind of one of those keys to keeping the family together for multiple years.
Hmm. Well, how could it be used for personal growth and development? Is there any way sudden wealth could be used for that?
Yeah, you're hitting on so many of these areas that people tend to value, but they don't necessarily think of at the moment they, inherit or receive wealth.
Hmm.
And it's really common for people to say, oh, I want to, buy a boat, go on a trip, buy a car,
Sure.
pay off debt. And when you step back and think about what do you really value and what do you really want to do, a lot of people would really say, I've always wanted to invest in myself, start my business that I've dreamed of, or get my master's degree, or help my grandchildren go to college. All
Yeah.
of these kind of ways that we invest in people uh, are are really valid ways to spend money that aren't necessarily the tangible things that first come to mind when receiving wealth. And we encourage our clients to really take that pause that I talked about earlier, because if you don't go spending the money right away, it allows you to think, how will this money really be a launching pad for me or for my family, that can help us become greater than what we could have done without it.
Hmm.
And if you're receiving that money from an inheritance, I imagine that whoever's passed that money to you is looking down and smiling when they know that you're using it in a way that aligns with your values or really investing in yourself.
Do you have any cautionary tales of when someone mismanaged the money and there was sort of a negative outcome?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned it a little bit before, but we've all heard those stories of the lottery winner who ends up in a worse position than they
Hmm.
did before they won the lottery earnings, right? And that's because they could have overspent. One of the things I would really caution against is if you're making a big purchase, think about how that has long term impacts. So if you buy a bigger house because you have more money, that bigger house probably comes with bigger property taxes, larger insurance payments, more room to upkeep. If you're paying a house cleaner, the house cleaner is going to cost more. If it has a bigger yard, your lawn care is going to cost
Mhm.
more. There's all these things that people don't necessarily think of that are ongoing costs to a purchase. The house was an example. A second home would be a really big example of long term ongoing costs. Buying a boat, you've got the, again, insurance, the property taxes, the docking fees, the cleaning fees, the
Mhm.
repairs that come up. There's so many examples of things that are typical desires that have long-term costs, and if that's not factored in and you don't have the cash flow to sustain that, you could end up in a worse position. The other example with lottery winners, I'm sure, is those poachers, right? The long lost friends or acquaintances that come out of the woodwork, the
Of
charitable
course.
organizations that are, you know, hitting that person from every angle. So there's so many ways that the resources could actually make you worse off instead of better off. And that's what we want to try and protect against by really being intentional with the way that we're using these resources.
Absolutely. Tiffany, there's a lot more to think about in this situation than I personally thought there was. I learned a lot. Thanks for being on the show, and I'm looking forward to having you back.
Of course, it's always nice to talk to you, Richie.